Kitty McNamee.
Welcome to Cultural Attache.
Thank you.
We're here to talk about Romeo and Juliet at LA Opera that you have choreographed two previous productions of, but now you are the director as well. So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
So the composer Charles Gounod is quoted as having said, "My opinion changes rapidly. One minute I can think it is very good, and the next time I look at it, I see all the flaws and weaknesses therein." How much does that perspective reflect your experience as a choreographer and perhaps as an opera director now?
I think that resonates so profoundly with me. I could have written that myself because particularly when there's an audience watching with you, you just feel so exposed because any little, problem or shift in the flow, you take such responsibility for. And it's interesting because I can look at the archival to give notes. And when I look at that and I'm removed and there's not people with me, I'm so much more comfortable and at ease. And I think, oh wow, this is really gorgeous production. Like I can see the strength and the beauty of it. But watching with an audience is really terrifying.
Is it more terrifying now that you've taken on the title of director? Was it less terrifying in the two previous productions at LA Opera where you were just the choreographer?
Yes, because this is the first opera I've ever directed. And actually, Romeo and Juliet was the first opera that I'd ever choreographed. So the first time I was quite nervous, the second time less so. But this is, I really feel like it feels right and it feels like a great fit for me. But I definitely was, my palms were sweaty.
Well, I know there are certain restrictions on how much you can change an existing production, and this one was originally directed by Ian Judge.
Mhm.
And I know you told San Francisco Classical Voice that you don't have that much freedom except to freshen it up. How would you define freshen it up as this production looks compared to the two previous productions?
That's a great question. The set is as it is. I can't change the set. I could adjust slightly, maybe the timing of transitions, but the set functions in a very specific way. I inherited that. Um, Also, I think the score calls for when people enter, the story calls for who comes in and what happens. So that's all fixed. But the nuancing of performances and making some choices, say, for instance, having Mercutio stay on stage after he dies. The Romeo and Mercutio, Duke and Justin are also friends and have worked together, and they have a very dynamic chemistry. And so I decided to keep him on stage and utilize that. So I can make small adjustments like that. I think my biggest impact is in the performance of the singers and how I can perhaps add my sense of drama, my physical interpretation of storytelling, and can kind of utilize that to give their performances a little bit more freedom.
And I'm going to ask you about your approach to part of that story in a minute. But if you had the freedom to not do 100% overhaul of this production, but say if you had the freedom to change 50% of it, or more freedom than what you had, are there things that stand out to you as things that you would like to see different?
I would like to somehow simplify the set transitions. There's quite a few. Towards the end, it's very, very challenging. So that would be my number one thing. I think the set's glorious, but I think also, maybe in the past we had more bodies on stage to help deal with things, or the opera at the level that we're doing it now, the budget is not quite maybe what it was before. And I have to say, like, a shout out to LA Opera, by the way, for continuing to make work and continuing to bring this like extremely high level of talent to LA audiences, because I'm just so grateful that they survived the pandemic. They're pushing forward, they're doing new work, they're doing classics. So yeah, just want to put that out there. I think it's really important.
Yeah, I do have to say it was. I told you before we got started that it was my first time seeing this opera at all, and the first time,
Hmm.
obviously, then seeing this production. And I was wondering, if the stagehands at LA Opera are great, but if that could have been choreographed to to move a little more swiftly, I think it might have benefited everyone. It felt like I
Yeah,
felt their labor as they were doing it.
yeah, 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 that's true. That's the one thing I would change if I could.
Makes sense. Now,
Yeah.
this is your third collaboration, as we discussed, with LA
Hmm.
Opera on Gounod's Romeo and Juliet.
Hmm.
How have you seen your work grow in the 19 years since you first were involved with this production?
I think the number one thing is that I trust my instincts more. Like you have skill, yes. Everybody who's working in these venues has skill, but I think that I've learned to trust my instincts. And within the noise of directing, where there's so many people asking you so many questions, which is very different from just choreographing. You're just choreographing, you have like a small thing that you're responsible for, and you're not in as much demand. So I think my assistant director, Eric Friedman, was incredibly helpful. He handled a lot of the, task oriented, schedule oriented, but also in the room, he said, it's your voice, it's your vision that counts, Kitty. In this situation, while you're the director, that's all that matters. And like to have that voice to me and have that supported was amazing.
Well, you've been on the other side of that, where you've been the person asking the director the questions. So I assume on some level you prepped yourself for everything you knew you were going to face.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that even with the knowledge and preparation, you can't imagine the it's like full bore, every rehearsal, full out, as we say.
Um, you've stated that you wanted this production to be experienced through Juliet's eyes so that she
Hmm.
could take more agency of her story and her fate in this. How do you, as a director, make that something that an audience is going to inherently feel or witness or just think about?
It's really interesting because our Juliet is very powerful as a person. Amina is very powerful as a person. She's uh, insightful and not afraid to voice her opinion. So I had to really, when I encountered her and she came in very late, I had to remind myself, Kitty, you wanted her opinion, you wanted her point of view. And I knew on a gut level, like Duke, elegant, princely, wonderful, um, gentle, like the epitome of like a romantic lead. And I knew that Amina, just on again, trusting my gut, was going to bring the fire, was going to bring this sort of pressure to the role. So I just tried to listen to her and actually truly let her have agency, which I think comes through in the production. And also I made an adjustment with Lady Capulet in other productions. She didn't have any agency and she was treated kind of badly, literally like sort of tossed around, or I couldn't handle it. So she did not have agency, but she still wasn't abused or um, discarded. So that's something else that I sort of pushed forward in the way that Juliet dealt with her and the way that Capulet dealt with her. So that was reflected.
See, the way it came through to me is, and this is, I'm assuming, part of the construction of the opera, is how quickly she says yes to marrying Romeo. I just sort of feel like only somebody who has that agency can say yes.
And is willing to risk everything for it. Because that moment in the particularly for me in the poison aria, the potion aria, when she makes that decision, she's willing to risk everything to not only like fulfill her love for Romeo, but also not be given away, not have her body given away, not have her soul given away by her parents to someone that, and that also would have, she had already committed to Romeo at that point. So if it would have been like morally corrupt, physically corrupt, emotionally corrupt for her.
Is it important for the audience to understand this?
Um, I mean, maybe I just assumed that they would, looking at it. But sometimes I just make those assumptions that maybe, I don't know. I mean, I just assume people would make that leap. Did you understand that, or?
Like I said, I got it straight away when she so quickly, like I knew this was not a passive Juliet. She's not written to be passive.
Yes,
And she's not
exactly.
performed passively either. So
Yes.
I sort of knew she was a force to be reckoned with from very early on. I also knew that most of her big stuff was going to be in the second half of the opera.
And she's a heroine. In my mind, it should have gone smoothly. Like this should have been like a romantic comedy almost. But the parents had to get in there and society had to get in there. So, but I think one thing that I really appreciated about Amina was that she's able to pull off the lighter, youthful tone in the beginning of the opera. And then she has the resonance and the depth of character to make the later moments plausible.
Yeah, I agree. Now you mentioned, it should be a romantic comedy. One question I always love to ask people who are involved in a project like Romeo and Juliet is why do you think we as an audience respond so strongly to stories where the couple does not end up together? Why is great love doomed to separation or death?
It's weird when you put it that way, it makes me want to cry. It does. And I'm not a crier, but there's such hope for me in young people believing in love and believing in like a peaceful existence. It's so incredibly hopeful. And I think that all of us wish that this never-ending hatred, this never-ending war, people don't know why it started, but it continues. How the young people today would love for that to cease and love for love to rule. And I think that even though, it's manageable to see it in an opera, it's manageable to see this tragedy. Okay, it's done. We can walk away. It's cathartic, but it begins with the hope.
It does, but look at how popular Titanic was. The couple doesn't end up together. La La
That's
Land,
right.
couple doesn't end up together. The Way We Were, Out of Africa, Gone with the Wind, Wuthering Heights. I mean, we could go back. All the great dramatic love stories end up with the couple apart.
And they start with the purity of love. So maybe it's a way for humanity to sort of manage reality.
Or get a sense of how fragile, that purity of love really is.
Yeah. I mean, I thought about it a lot in working on the project, like my first love or other people's first loves, and how you just had every hope in the world that it would be this beautiful thing forever, you know? And then reality kind of smacks you in the face. Differences creep in and reality creeps in and the day to day, so maybe this is just a way to hold on to that hope and then also put it like why people watch horror movies, which I don't watch, but they watch horror movies for a particular reason, or why people read Grimm's fairy tales to their children, sort of like a vaccination, right? You have a little bit of it, so you can build some strength, emotional strength for when it really becomes true.
Right. I read an interview you gave recently with Opera Wire, and you talked about wanting to work with contemporary composers, particularly female composers. Um, and it's one thing to have that goal. I'm wondering what steps you've taken or what conversations you've had so that that goal can become a reality.
Well, I worked with Anna Klein off and on for years. We actually met when I started my dance company, or I had a dance company based in LA. I was in New York for a festival, and she was there. She just arrived in the States like 2 weeks before. And she was at my event and she said, "Oh, I'd love to compose something for you." And I didn't know her, at all. And luckily I'm not a jerk. And I said, that sounds really amazing. Do you have, something you could share with me? And she gave me this sample of her work. And I mean, I still am blown away by her talent and her originality. And I thought, oh my God. And so I said, yes, of course, please write anything you want. And she did write several things for me from my company. So, I nurtured that relationship. And then I just try to stay connected with like Missy Mazzoli. I've met her. I've used some of her work for my dance company. Ellen Reed, I have seen her work, to just try to stay in the periphery, I guess, so that if the opportunity arises, I will have like some exposure to them.
Yeah, I hope it happens. I think everybody should be able to realize their dreams, and I think it would be great to see you collaborating with them.
I think it'd be really exciting.
Now,
I mean, I was going to say that, Christopher Couch and LA Opera gave me a huge opportunity. I mean, can you imagine? I've never directed an opera, and they gave me this beast. I know the beast well, but still.
right. So does that fuel a desire to direct more and more operas? Was this so gratifying that you can't wait for the next one?
Yes, and I feel even though it was, terrifying, I felt very much that I was in the right place. It felt so comfortable. And I feel that I love music. I've always been obsessed with music. I've always been obsessed with storytelling. Usually it's through movement. And hold on. Um, usually it's through telling a story through movement and music with no text. So this ability to have people, even though I've worked with opera singers as a choreographer, it was different because I was working with them directly with their interpretation of these roles over time, I loved it.
And hopefully the next one will be one that you haven't worked on, so you get to have your hands all over it and not have any previous experiences, as perhaps a burden on what you might do.
Yeah, it definitely was complicated. Um, and I have to say that a lot of the cast, it was their premiere at LA Opera, and they were really open-minded. And I can imagine that some people might not want to work with someone who hadn't directed an opera before. Particularly if you're younger, you want someone, seasoned, I would say. But they were so open-minded and so into making discoveries that I haven't really encountered that before.
Well, that bodes well. Um,
Yeah.
you mentioned Missy Mazzoli and Ellen Reed, two women who I think are amazing composers and also they're a bit of disruptors in what
Mhm.
in what the form is. And if you look at certainly a couple male directors, Yuval Sharon, James Dara, they're also disruptors. How important is it for you to either be a disruptor or to work with disruptors as you continue your work in opera?
Well, it's fascinating because my company was called Hysterica, and we were in LA, from like 2000 on for 10 solid years, and then we popped up. But we were very much disruptors in the dance world. And all of the people that came out of my company are very much disruptors, like Ryan Heffington and Nina McNeely, both of whom just won Emmys for work in a medium that, 10, 15 years ago would not have hired any of us. Um, it's kind of ironic that I'm in this very classical world, given where I started, with like a punk rock dance company. But I I feel like all of these steps are bringing me to the place where maybe I can do what I did in the dance world in the opera world.
And do you want to stay more in the opera world than the dance world at this point?
I think I do actually. I mean, I had my run at it with my company. I got to do exactly what I wanted. We had no budget, we had no money, we all starved, but it was fine. And I got to do it my way, which was really important, and collaborate with all these amazing people. I think if I went back into the dance world now, it's so challenging, like to have a company survive. And so I wouldn't want to do that again. I think there would be too many barriers to just doing, the DIY work that we did before. Um, and I think somehow the combination of storytelling and singing is a really great like next iteration for me.
Maybe musicals will be on the horizon as well.
Yeah, I was thinking about that actually. I was thinking about that because I don't really have an interest in directing plays. It's like I love music and singers, and I love movement. So yeah, I think I find a kind of, I mean, I just feel also very grateful that I've been able to have a creative life, you know, and if it keeps morphing and if I can trust that the universe is sort of guiding me as I go and that people are able to take a risk on me.
How important is it for you to take a risk with yourself?
It's very important because I'm not going to lie. When I got the job, I was like, oh, don't fail, don't fail. That's all I kept thinking, like during the entire rehearsal, like, don't fail. You hate to fail. Don't fail. Like, so I think my entire life have been open to risk. And that is probably why, I have failed in the past on things and you suffer, but the joy of taking the risk is larger for me than if I didn't take the risk and I turned the opportunity down. That is more of a failure for me.
And you learn a lot more from failures than you do from successes.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. And I think that another layer to that is like the kind of relationships that you can develop with people who are also willing to take risks, like Ryan Heffington and Nina, those people. But also, like I would say, Justin, who played Mercutio in this cast, was very open to having conversations and taking risk and changing things. And, encountering people like that is super exciting.
Of course.
Also, the conductors, Domingo, there was one moment, which I won't go into detail about, where the cast wanted to do something that was a little more safe and mundane. And I said, I really want them to do something else that is riskier, but it'll pay off. And he said, absolutely, we have to take the risk.
Well, I hope it wasn't the bedroom scene that opens up the second half because I was frankly surprised at how many people laughed and cheered at the same time at that moment.
That was not the moment, but it's fascinating to me. And I actually pushed Duke, like when he says, I rest, and then he runs and jumps on the bed. It was like he did it playfully in one rehearsal. I said, you have to keep that. And he was concerned that people would laugh at him. And I was like, you know what? People may Twitter, I guess you can't use that word anymore.
Yeah, we've X'd that word out.
Yeah. People may snicker, or they may feel uncomfortable and laugh slightly uncomfortably because you hit on something that's real and you're willing to do that in this production. And it's not safe and it's a little bit risky and it's playful and it's appropriate. If you're supposed to be playing a 16-year-old, you know?
Yeah.
I find that curious. Like I guess abandon makes people nervous.
Or recognizing themselves what they don't possess.
Yeah. And they're laughing nervously.
Right.
It actually doesn't bother me because I feel like, oh, these people are actually engaged. That's more important to me than getting like the correct or expected response. The fact that they're actually in the story that much.
Yeah, I agree. Let me finish our time here, Kitty, with asking you about something that Martha Graham is quoted as saying. She said, "Nothing is more revealing than movement." What does your movement on stage, whether in Romeo and Juliet or anywhere else that people have seen your work, reveal about you?
Well, I can say that, first of all, I love Martha Graham. Some of my dancers from Hysterica days came to opening night. And what they said was, oh, we can see your touch, that they are, even in this realm or in this like super heightened format, they're still human. And you can feel the humanity in the way they're moving. I think that's really what drives me. It's
And
like
do,
your reaction, your human reaction, you follow that instinct. And per, particularly like per performer. Duke's instincts are very different than Amina's. Getting him to follow that so he's really personified physically is really interesting to me.
and do you see yourself on the stage? Not just your work, but do you see you? Do you see aspects of you yourself on that stage?
Yes. Yes. And I think if I look back at my contemporary dance work, I'm like, oh my God, like looking back at it now, my whole psychology is on parade, right? Sometimes I think, what was I thinking, you know? But I think that I mean, I'm a romantic. I think that's on display, and my personal dream for that pure love is on display. My investment in that, and then also the loss in Act Three, you know, between Mercutio and Romeo, and then even Lady Capulet when she comes in to discover Tybalt, like that sort of. Actually, Catherine Calgal, who is my assistant and also has danced for me, is Lady Capulet. So I was able to sort of infiltrate the opera through her in a way.